Vandy. I'm going to introduce to you Vandy Vandewater, who is interim senior planner with the County of Mendocino Planning and Building Services. So Vandy, you're here. Welcome to share your screen and tell us about Mendocino Planning.
Sure, thank you, Penny. As she mentioned, I'm the interim senior planner currently with the County of Mendocino in our planning department. So today I was just going to kind of broadly touch upon the various kind of agritourism uses. At least I'm using Mendocino County's like kind of use types and language, but I'm sure that most of the counties have very similar use types and languages and similar requirements. So the reason I didn't get very specific is because it is very much case site by site specific. So I do believe having those conversations with your local planning department are going to be crucial in the agritourism industry to ensure that your businesses are coming up compliant with the county regulations. Let me go to my screen. Okay. So just broadly, so for the planning in California, there's generally permitted uses that every property owner has depending on their zoning, as well as conditional uses that require a bit more permitting to get those kind of things off the ground. And so just to touch quickly upon what, like for example, what in Mendocino is considered a permitted use, I'm sure all of you are aware that your ranching, your agricultural, growing of products, those are just allowed by right. And I think that's also, I mean, that's above planning. That's the right to farm in the state of California. But so in addition to that, most counties allow for the roadside sale of their agricultural products that have been grown on the property. So if you're trying to, and usually some of the smaller value added products can be sold as well. For example, like jams and jellies. There's a bit more on the environmental health side that Karen will speak to. But for planning purposes, you can sell your agricultural products at a roadside stand. Additionally, farm visits are something that's generally permitted. I know for the County of Mendocino, our only kind of concern, I guess I should say, is that you have sufficient parking that allows people to, come off the main road or highway or wherever the public access is, and they're able to come off of that and park somewhere that still allows for, fire emergency vehicles if need be, or emergency access. And this can be those, people come and pick apples out of your orchard, or you're doing kind of some farm education. Those are things that are permitted with the property. And then lastly, at least for wineries, tasting rooms are also a permitted use. And this applies to not, and this doesn't apply to a zoning district, but specifically to wineries. We also allow for distilleries, and if that distillery is producing their alcohol or their product on site, they also are permitted to have that tasting room along with their distillery operation. And so while these uses generally don't require any extensive discretionary permits, there is often a business license required when you're going beyond just the simple cultivation of agricultural products. So for example, if you are going to do that roadside sale, if you are going to have farm visits that are more educational based, and if you are going to have tasting rooms, those are going to require that a business license be obtained from your local tax collector. In addition to that, any structures that you have to build for your agritourism, any structure, for example, in the County of Mendocino, the only things that do not require building permits are pretty much fences under 6 feet and storage sheds under 120 square feet with no electricity. So for the most part, most agricultural tourism structures are most likely going to require some sort of building permit. And then lastly, and it's always good to check with your state, with various state agencies. The count, at least in Mendocino, there are sometimes issues where a person will check with planning and building and will say our requirements are all satisfied with what you're proposing, but then they'll go and do their work without having checked a state agency, only to find that, you know, they accidentally impacted a wetland, or the structures they've constructed are not compliant with CAL FIRE's fire safe standards. So it's always important to check with your local or with your state agencies. And I listed 3 here that I find to be the most frequently contacted from people not checking to see what the other requirements are. CAL FIREs are pretty typical requests of just, you know, making sure your structures are fire safe. You have the 100-foot tree clearance around your buildings. Fish and Wildlife is usually only contacted if a stream or if a wetland is being impacted, and that happens very rarely, but it does. We do have a winery that last year had tried to establish itself right in the middle of a wetland, so that was kind of an issue for the vineyard portion of it, and they had to move the vineyard. And then I only put CDFA because I know that if you're going to have your agricultural products, you'll most likely there might be some permitting through CDFA for food and agriculture. Why are you not changing? There we go. So then moving on to a bit more intensive uses. As you're aware, agricultural zoning districts and rangeland, which I'm sure some of you also have ownership on, are really designated to preserve agricultural uses. So when you go beyond that general use, you typically go into what are considered conditional uses, which require further permitting beyond the business license or building permits. And again, these are, for the county of Mendocino, this is kind of what qualifies under conditional uses. I'm sure Sonoma is maybe somewhat similar, maybe even a little stricter to some degree. But for example, farm stays are gonna require conditional permitting because we typically don't have transient habitation outside of our commercial districts. We do have beds and breakfasts, we do have vacation home rentals, but those are less intense, I should say, than, you know, operating a bed and breakfast or an inn or a hotel on your agricultural product or on your agricultural parcel. Food or the commercial kitchen and food preparation is permitted in the county of Mendocino. I wasn't able to check on the other counties before this meeting. But so this allows you to prepare certain foods that are a bit more than just your jellies, jams, pickled items. So if you're trying to make, you know, a bit more intensive food products, you will need to establish a commercial kitchen through a use permit. Currently in Mendocino, special events that are bigger than 100 people require permitting. It's a less intensive permit that's required than most of these uses. It's called an administrative permit. And at least for the county of Mendocino, administrative permits are discretionary but do not have a public hearing. So essentially you're still getting, you'll probably still have conditions of approval that you'll have to adhere to, but you won't be bringing this project to a public forum where the public can just generally comment on it. And then just as a last example, there's, in Mendocino, we have what's called commercial recreation. And this is things such as hunting, horseback, or outdoor activities. And I just want to bring up the hunting because that is something that, at least in Mendocino, there have been issues where our zoning code does require that a business license be obtained for hunting, if not a use permit in addition to that. hunting is allowed by the residents of the parcel, but once you start offering your lands as a hunting opportunity to people who are not residents on your parcel, depending on the jurisdiction, it does come into kind of a business play. So you do have to get permitting to some extent, usually in most counties, if you're going to be offering your land to the public for hunting. And the same goes for horseback and other outdoor activities. So then for the requirements, in addition to the building permits and business licenses, I mentioned the admin permit, which is a discretionary permit without a public hearing. But what most of you will end up having to get for some of these uses will be a conditional use permit, or as most people refer to it, as a CUP. And so this process, depending again on the county and jurisdictions, can take anywhere from 4 months to more than a year, and it's always very dependent on the site. It's very dependent on the clients and the applicant. You know, if you're willing to work with us and have those conversations, the process does speed itself up a bit. But you know, if there's things, if you submit incomplete applications, if there's requirements that the department is requesting, and for example, archaeological studies, that typically adds 2 to 3 months to a project, because the applicant will have to hire the archaeologist, have the study done, and submit it to our archaeological commission for review. And just to note that Mendocino County is actually the only county, I think, with an archaeological commission. So Sonoma, Humboldt, Lake won't be doing an archaeological commission. They might not even need the study. But just be aware that when you do conditional use permits, that additional studies could be included, and that's a cost that you'll have to consider. And biological studies are often required in Mendocino because of our biodiversity and sensitive species. And then again, compliance with state agencies. So for some conditional use permits, if they're not exempt from CEQA, CDFW will have certain requirements, including a filing fee of roughly I think right now the fee is roughly $2,400 to file a notice of determination, which is what you would do if you are not exempt from CEQA. So that's just another cost to keep in mind. And you know, the use permits, building permits, business licenses, they all have fees associated with them. The business licenses typically tend to be the cheapest, while use permits tend to be more expensive. So again, having those conversations with your local planning department is going to be real important, because it can help you determine if it's a viable option. And with that, this is just our local, for Mendocino, our local contact information. And yeah, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them after Karen's presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Vandy. And as Vandy says, please hold your questions till after Karen gives her talk. So Karen, we're going to put you on to, let's see.
Okay, so we're ready?
We're ready for you, Karen. Thank you so much.
All right. Share. Okay, so we're sharing the screen. Okay, so yes, hello, good morning. I'm Karen Giovannini with UC Cooperative Extension in Sonoma County. And I'm going to be talking about the environmental health portion of having food on the farm, selling it, serving it, whatever. I will comment though on what Vandy was saying. Yeah, Sonoma County tends to be more intense for sure. And, but I will say that when people do a use permit, which is a very difficult process to get through, they do work with the other agencies, the state agencies as well. They notice all those agencies that could be affected or could be touched by your project. So at least there's that. Yay. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about selling food on your farm. So, you know, like Vandy said, if you have a farm, the easiest thing you can do as far as selling or merchandising anything is to have a farm stand. And farm stands don't require any permits from environmental health, as long as all you're doing is selling the produce that you grow on site. They're generally allowed in ag zones, and you just want to make sure that you understand what your parcel zoning is. Don't use a building, because if you use a building, you know, like say you set it up in your barn, then you're going to have to have that barn permitted for that use. And, you know, it'll require restrooms and bringing it up to code. So just use freestanding. You can shade it. You can use it against the barn, but just not in the barn. And some counties do have size limits as how big the farm stand can be. So just keep that in mind. So, but if you want to have a farm stand, you want to sell more than just what you grow on the farm. For example, foods, processed foods. So those can include like bottled water, but it can also include things made in a cottage food operation or a commercial kitchen, or you buy from the store, retail, wholesale. You can do all those things at a farm stand. It just has to be non-potentially dangerous, which means it doesn't need to be held to temperature. So no dairy products, no meat products, nothing that has to be held to temperature in order to keep it safe, food safe. So you can refrigerate things, you can have cold drinks or whatever, but you just cannot sell items, or you cannot sell food items that require they be held to temperature, either hot or cold. And you can also sell non-food products like, you know, swag from your farm, say you have magnets or hats, whatever. You can sell those. And with these beyond produce, you're allowed, with the California Food Code, you're allowed up to 10% of the floor space of your farm stand, not to exceed 50 square feet. And I'm just putting a disclaimer in here, your permit department or your planning department may require a permit for the farm stand that goes beyond selling just produce from the farm. In Sonoma County, that's not required. You just need to work with environmental health, but in other counties that may be required. So just keep that in mind. If you want to do any sampling from your farm stand, or even sampling when people come for farm visits or educational visits, you will need to get a permit from environmental health. And depending on what it is that you're sampling and how much of it and how often and all these other things, how dangerous it could be, then they'll decide what level of permit. There's different levels of food facility permits, but you'll just work with your environmental health department to figure out what that is and what the requirements are. Usually the requirements are, at minimum, you'll have to have a hand washing station and a restroom will have to be in the vicinity. If you wanted to sell meat, dairy, or serve alcohol at your farm, whether packaged or serving it as food, you'll definitely have to get approval from environmental health. If you're doing meat and dairy, you'll have to work, well, at least with dairy, you will definitely have to work with California Department of Food and Ag. Meat, I'll cover both of those in a little more depth later. Alcohol, you can only, alcohol can only be served on your farm if you're not already a winery, if you don't already have an ABC license. Can only be served on farms when a caterer, a licensed caterer, has that license already, or for special events, if it's a nonprofit event, the nonprofit can get the approval or the license from ABC for that particular event. Otherwise, if you were just to make meals on your farm and you want to serve alcohol with them, that's not going to be allowed. So unless, of course, you already have an ABC license, which means you would be making the alcohol there. So anyway, moving on. So this slide is about what permits the farm, if the farm needs to get the environmental health permit or if somebody else needs to get it. So in the case of the farm, selling prepackaged foods or making foods on site, the farm definitely needs to work with environmental health and get that permit to do that. If you're having vendors on the farm, so say you're having a festival and you're inviting other vendors onto the farm, each of those vendors will have to have a permit, and you should definitely work with environmental health just to make sure that that's all, that they're aware of it at least. And you may need to get a permit from them just for the overall event. And you'll definitely need to get a permit from planning to do, more than likely to do these types of events. When the farm doesn't need to get a permit from environmental health is if you're using just a licensed caterer. So say you're doing a farm to table dinner and you bring in a licensed caterer to do that dinner, then they have the permit from environmental health, or you're having a licensed food truck come in and do it. So they're the ones that carry that permit. So you may still have to work with the planning department, but at least you won't have to work with environmental health. So what if you want to make value-added foods with the produce or your farm produce or livestock? So that you have a couple of options for produce type foods. Cottage foods is one and processed food registration is the other. Cottage foods can be made in your home kitchen, must be made in your home kitchen. There is a list of foods that are approved by California Department of Public Health, and only those foods on the list can be made. And you would work with your county environmental health department to obtain the permit to make cottage foods. Whereas a processed food registration allows a much wider range of foods that can be made, basically anything except for low acid canned foods. And you work with California Department of Public Health. The foods must be made in a commercial kitchen, and public health would come out and inspect the kitchen and your processes and everything. So those are the options. And also cottage foods has an income limit of $50,000 a year, whereas processed food registration has no limit to the income. And if you want to do cottage food operation on your farm in Sonoma County, you don't need to obtain approval from planning, but other counties you may need to. If you want to go to the trouble of building a commercial kitchen on your farm, then yeah, you'll need to work with planning because you need to get a building permit, and it will most likely require either a zoning permit or a conditional use permit in Sonoma County or other counties. If you wanted to have something made that's a low acid canned food, then that would need to be made in a licensed cannery, or you can use a co-packer, or you could just use a co-packer for any product that you want made. And a co-packer is somebody that you can take your farm produce to. You can even take a recipe to them. They can work with you to scale it up. They'll bottle it, or they'll make the processed food and they will package it and label it for you. So in all these cases though, when you're selling this product from your farm, there just needs to be traceability. So if you do have it done at a co-packer or a cannery or by somebody else, that you just know who's made it, where it was made, and you have records of that. So, and that's just for, again, traceability in case somebody gets sick, which they won't. Everything will be made, right? If you do, like I mentioned before, if you do want to sell or make dairy products on your farm, you're going to need to work with California Department of Food and Agriculture. For dairies, they come out and they permit the dairies. They do inspections, regular inspections. If you want to also make value-added product, cheeses or ice cream, whatever, then you'll need a permit for that as well. Or you'll need to work with them to get licensed, to do that as well. And if you want to sell that product from your farm, you will also need to work with environmental health and probably planning. If you want to sell meat on your farm, whether you want to sell packaged meat only, or you want to go into like a salami plate or something like that, you're definitely going to need to work with environmental health and planning, but the meat has to be from USDA process. So that means the livestock was slaughtered USDA and cut and wrapped USDA for you to be able to sell it on your farm or use it in a way that other consumers will be consuming it. Okay, so moving on. Overnight guests, yay! We have the sheep because, you know, you might want to count your sheep. So there are 3 types of overnight guests on private property, and not all of them are allowed in all zones. So just know that these are just the 3 variations, but you would need to check with your planning department to find out which you could do on your parcel, if any. So a farm stay and bed and breakfast, when you farm stay and bed and breakfast, you serve meals with those, with each of those, and you would need to, and the meals are included in the price of lodging. In the case of a bed and breakfast, you're only allowed to serve breakfast. In the case of a farm stay, you can serve as many or as few meals as you want. But the meals are part of the lodging cost. If you can also sell other products to them, to your customers, but they're not part of the meal. And vacation rentals don't have, you don't serve any meals for vacation rentals. But at any rate, farm stay and bed and breakfast definitely require you to get permits from environmental health, and any overnight guest accommodations, you need to work with your planning department, like I said. And lastly, I'm just going to cover real quickly well and septic, because if you're doing anything on your farm with where you're selling the produce or value added and you're using water to, you know, from rinsing produce to using it in recipes, the well will need to be tested. So initially they have a long list of things that they test for, but at least quarterly, your well will need to be tested. And you will need to, in the case of dairies, I believe the dairy inspector does the testing, but in all other cases, you would have somebody do the testing and they would submit the report to environmental health. If you're on septic, which most rural properties are, then if you're doing a cottage food operation in Sonoma County, you can do a self-certification. There is a, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a self-certification form in the cottage food application. You would fill that out if your septic is up to 20 years old. In all other cases, you would need to have a septic consultant come out and do a field clearance at minimum for your system. But in the case of, say, processed food, you know, if you want to do a commercial kitchen or you wanted to have large visitor services, then they would need to make sure that your system is large enough to accommodate that. And again, each county is different, but basically you're going to need to make sure that your well and septic are okay for public use. And that concludes my presentation. So you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And there is the shortcut to the website that I created that has fact sheets for these, what I just covered, plus more and way more detail. So, and I will stop the share.
What do you want for lunch next week?
Thank you, Karen. That was beautiful. That was incredibly comprehensive. And I know it's all very complicated.
Yeah, and boring. So I apologize.
It is. And every county on top of that is different. So now we've got time for questions. So
Penny,
you-
I had a few questions from the chat, if that's okay with you.
Yes, please.
So the first one I had was, I think for Mendocino County, so probably Vandy, but maybe this is really an environmental health question. Is Mendocino County progressing towards allowing small farm kitchen use? I guess that's like a cottage kitchen.
Sorry, say it again. Someone just like tried to walk in on my office.
Oh, no worries at all. So the question was, is Mendocino County progressing to allow small farm kitchen use? So I guess that's like a cottage use.
So that I think that would be more of an environmental health question for our department, but I will say that the county is working on updating our zoning code, like doing a giant overhaul. So that is something that could be considered in part of our zoning code update. And I definitely encourage anyone to follow the board and the planning commission for that, so that you can make your voices heard, so that agritourism can be supported through our zoning code. But unfortunately, for that specific question, I think they would need to reach out to our environmental health department, which I can give you the phone number if anyone needs it. I'll put
Yeah,
it in
if you could put that in the chat, that would be great. I know we do have one link to them already in there, but that would be awesome. Thanks, Vandy. Another question we had, which I think is for both Karen and Vandy, and we start with Karen, is what's the difference between farm stay, bed and breakfast versus vacation rentals? So Karen, if you'd like to kick us off with that.
Sure. So a farm stay is only allowed on ag zone lands and per your county also. And they have to have an agricultural element to them. And the farm stay, income from the farm stay needs to be incidental to the farming operation. So it can't be your main source of income as a farm stay. A bed and breakfast is, like, for example, in Sonoma County, is not allowed on, like, we have 3 ag zones. So the best land ag zone does not allow for a bed and breakfast, only allows for a farm stay. So, so you would, again, need to check with your planning department, but a bed and breakfast usually allows for more rooms. And there's a fact sheet on my website that talks about the difference between a farm stay, a bed and breakfast, and also there's vacation rentals in there as well. Vacation rentals just depends on the farm. I mean, just depends on the zoning code if you're allowed to do them. So, yeah.
So then from the planning side, really the only difference is the intensity and like kind of the number of people you're intending to host. In Mendocino, we allow vacation, and it's a little challenging because as I'm sure most of you know, there's a coastal zone and a non-coastal zone, and those are just like completely different things going on. So for example, in Mendocino, a vacation home rental is a permitted use everywhere, whereas inland, it's permitted if you have access to a public road. Otherwise, you need a use permit if you're on a private road. But generally, vacation home rentals and what we call room and board, which is the renting of no more than 2 rooms, those are typically permitted with a business license. And then once you start doing 3 or more rooms, that's when you fall under what we call transit habitation and require a use permit.
Thanks so much for that, Vandy. We did have another question there about anything special for the coastal zone in Mendocino County, but I think you've just covered that. Is there anything more you'd like to add?
No, just vacation home rentals are easier to establish in the coastal zone because of the support for coastal tourism. But again, if you're in the inland section, if you're on a publicly maintained road, then it's a business license.
Okay, great. Karen, back to you. Just a quick one here. Just asking, somebody was questioning whether, in fact, sometimes archaeological studies are needed in Sonoma County. They had been told that they did need one on one occasion. I don't know if that's something you can help us out with.
It will depend on, it would be required, if it was required, it would be required for a project that requires a use permit. And that would just be the finding, or what they determine, what planning determines is required for your use permit, which is dependent on the site and also the use that you're trying to do. So yeah, that's a no answer.
Thank you. We appreciate that though. So here's one. Does Sonoma or Mendocino regulate legal cannabis farm visits or tourism? Vandy, do you want to start us off with that one?
Sure. So I'm unsure about Sonoma, unfortunately, but I do know that Mendocino, we're currently actually in the process of adopting cannabis farm tour regulations. So what is currently proposed is that if you have a cannabis farm, you can offer one tour a week as an accessory to your business. Otherwise, if you're exceeding one tour a week, you'll need a use permit. So yeah, we are working to permit farm tour or cannabis farm tours.
Karen, anything you'd like to add there?
I don't know for sure, but I would assume that they're just like regular farm tours, but I couldn't say for sure. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so we have a question about water testing in Mendocino County. Do we contact environmental health or a private water testing lab, or who else? Vandy?
I believe that environmental health doesn't do the testing themselves, but they do have requirements on what they are looking for as test results. So if you're in Mendocino, definitely contact environmental health to get the information so that when you hire someone, they know exactly what they're testing for.
And again, those links are in the chat. So, and we'll also send those around, I think, afterwards. Another water question here. What about water connections to urban water supply? Does the business need to supply quarterly certification proof it reports income annually? Yeah, Karen?
So
No, I don't know. Because the urban water is tested. So that was my bad for assuming that everybody's on septic and well.
Got it. Great, thank you. Are there value-added products that can be made on the farm that does not require any additional permits? And this is particularly for Sonoma County.
Yeah, you can do cottage foods, but if you're going to do, if you're going to do something that requires a commercial kitchen, then we do have a provision for a zoning permit for smaller scale, and I can put the link in the chat about that. But it's still, and the zoning permit is, it's a more ministerial. It's like what Vandy was talking about with the administrative use permit. So yeah, we just call it a zoning permit. Same kind of thing. It's ministerial, meaning there's a checklist, and if your project fits within that checklist, then you can do that process. It still requires, you know, the building and all that, but it's a much lower cost permit. So versus tens of thousands of dollars, it'll be thousands of dollars. So.
Thank you. And Penny, I think I see in the chat that you might have something to add in.
Yes, for Lake County, I know we have a few people here from Lake County. Lake has just adopted the micro enterprise home kitchen operations permitting rule, where now basically you can, and this applies to any zoning in the county. It's not dependent on your zoning. You can apply for a permit to create and sell hot meals from your home kitchen. You apply to the Environmental Health Department. The income limit is $50,000 a year. You're allowed to do the equivalent of 30 meals a day or 60 meals a week. And this might be an option for farmers that want to do farm dinners in Lake County. It's slowly working its way through counties' approval. So far, Riverside, Imperial, Santa Barbara, and Lake counties have opted in, but this is a state rule, a state ordinance that was passed a couple of years ago and allows the counties to opt in to allow the Environmental Health Department in the county to issue permits for people to cook out of basically any home kitchen. And they will license your kitchen, and you can create and sell meals to your neighbors, which is another option for limited food service. And so if you're in Lake County, check with your environmental health department. I did put the link, Hannah, I put the link on that list if you can share it in the chat for Lake County. And I also shared for Lake County people the link to, if you want to do an event, a food service event, temporary event, you also check with your environmental health department. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Penny. So just a couple of other ones. I think we have a few more minutes for questions. So if you have any more, then do stick them in the chat, or else we can just unmute for a minute. But just a couple more I see in the chat. What about woofers? If you host woofers, can they stay in ag housing? Is that something either Karen or Vandy has comment on? Vandy, you want to start us off?
Sure. So ag housing, at least, again, different counties, so different requirements, but at least in Mendocino, there is ag employee and ag farm, or ag employee and ag laborer housing. And the only difference being how many, one's for a single laborer in their family and the other is for two or more. But as long as they are considered agricultural workers by the state of California, then they should be able to stay in the agricultural housing.
I have a question on that. To be considered agricultural workers, does that assume that they are paid a wage and paying into workers' comp and all of those other legal things?
Let's see. So I just have a definition here, and so it's defined in the California Labor Code. And by definition, it is farm workers employed in broad farming, including cultivating soil, dairying, growing and harvesting horticultural commodities, raising livestock, bees, fur-bearing animals and poultry, and any incidental activities on a farm. An agricultural worker means anyone engaged in farming activities with the exception of workers covered by the Federal National Labor Relations Act. So if it falls under any of those activities, then they would be considered by the state a farm employee. And just for clarification, unfortunately at this time, that does not include cannabis, because cannabis is currently considered a commercial product and not an agricultural product by the state.
Thanks for that, Vandy. That's important clarification. Appreciate that. So I have a question here from Tracy Pella. Tracy, I might need your help on just making sure I express this clearly. You were asking about how do roads fit into tours, roads meaning the impact. Tracy, do you want to add anything to that question if you'd like to unmute?
Yes. I'm trying to get my situation situated. Hi.
We can hear you.
I
Go
just
ahead.
know out here. Out here and the roads and stuff, these are all private roads. So having people up and down would not fare well definitely with neighbors. So during the process of getting your permitting, that probably is looked at, correct? Your road use.
And this is Mendocino, correct, Tracy?
This is Mendocino, correct. Yeah, there's a lot of roads out here that can't handle a lot of impact. So I'm just wondering how that fits into tourism.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm sure Humboldt and Lake are probably more aligned with Mendocino in that more than half of our county roads aren't even paved, even though they're publicly owned. I'm sure
Right.
Sonoma probably has a bit higher of a paved road quantity. But so if you have a discretionary permit, as Karen had mentioned, that discretionary permits get referred to state agencies or any agency, local, state, federal, that would have interest in the project. And one of those, or multiple, two of those agencies are going to be CAL FIRE and then your local transportation department. And CAL FIRE especially is going to want to know that if there's ever an incident, that they can get a fire truck to your property. So if you're down 10 miles down a private dirt road, and there's certain portions of that are going to need to be improved, that will become a requirement of your use permit prior to you operating. And then it does get a bit more complex, obviously, if you're part of a road association, because then, there's multiple stakeholders involved in the caretaking of that road. However, for planning divisions, once you start working within your road association, that is a civil matter and we really can't get involved, unfortunately. But just be aware that CAL FIRE definitely, and potentially your transportation department, will require improvements for emergency purposes.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So just a clarification here, Karen, I think we'll ask for your advice on this one. So you need a cottage food permit to sell any value-added product at a farm stand? Question?
No, you need a cottage food permit to make cottage foods. If you want to sell value-added products at your farm, it doesn't need to be a cottage food. It could be a cottage food, but it could just be any non-potentially hazardous food that you get from an approved source, which includes grocery stores, wholesale, cottage food operations, made in a commercial kitchen under a processed food registration, that kind of thing.
Excellent, thank you. And just following up from that, actually, our next question is about different kitchens. So what is required for a prep catering kitchen on site? Does it need to be a certified commercial kitchen? Vandy, could we start off with Mendocino County?
So it's such a gray area in the sense that it really depends on the particular item you're trying to make. If the value added is quite extensive that you're doing with your agricultural products, then you do have to kind of establish a commercial kitchen. However, again, this is for planning separate from EH. But if you're just taking apples that you grow and making applesauce, that you can just do in your home kitchen for planning's purposes. Again, this is independent of environmental health. So environmental health might have permitting, but planning, for our purposes, we're not concerned that you're making applesauce in your, hopefully, legal kitchen. It doesn't need to be commercial, just, not an unpermitted structure.
I think it's tricky, isn't it? We're covering all these different bases, and it would be definitely worth reaching out to environmental health as well. Penny, I see you nodding your head. Is there anything? We'll ask Karen too, but anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I would say you will need to talk to your environmental health department for any kind of processing of any product that you intend to sell. If you're just doing it for your family, that's fine. You can do what you want to do. Or if, for instance, you're doing it for a micro enterprise home kitchen operation, that's different. But even for cottage food and for anything you're making in your home kitchen, you need to talk to environmental health.
Right, and
Karen, go ahead.
Put in a link. That link that ends ag processing on the farm discusses like what is required when. But applesauce is, Vandy, not a good example because it's not on the cottage food list. So you could not make that in your home kitchen and sell it. But you could make it on your farm. You just have to go through the permitting process with both. In Sonoma County's case, you would have to get a zoning permit. As long as it's small enough scale that meets that criteria, or I don't know what the other thing I was going to say, but anyway, there you go.
That's great. Thanks for adding that in the link as well, Karen, and we appreciate that. So just a couple of questions, and then I think we're going to be turning on to the next part. Mendocino, who to talk with in Mendocino County for the in-home cooking, just like Penny explained to us in Lake County. Is that something that might come to Mendo?
Is that a me question?
Yes, for representing Mendocino County, I hope that's okay, Bandy. We're coming to you.
So sorry, can you repeat the?
Yeah, sure. So somebody who's interested in the micro kitchen, Lake County offering that Penny was just describing to us? I'm
I
wondering
can,
whether
I
that,
can talk
yeah,
to that. If you would like, I'm totally willing to talk to that, is that it's up to the county supervisors. It wouldn't be up to Vandy. It would
Yeah.
be the county supervisors to approve this in the county. And so if you're interested in getting it approved in Mendocino County or in Sonoma County, you want to talk to your most friendly county supervisor and push for this authorization and tell them how you're interested in doing this, how it would help you and your community and everybody else in your neighborhood, and how you would be feeding your neighbors healthy food and all these good things. There is also an organization called the Cook Alliance. And the Cook Alliance are the primary advocates for microenterprise home kitchen operation authorizations in the counties. So they have advocates in most counties that you could work with. And they have advice in how to approach your county supervisors. And they suggest not trying to bother the environmental health department unless your county has already improved it, because all the environmental health people can say is, we don't know yet and we don't like this. And they have to wait for the county supervisors to approve it.
Yeah, and I
Thanks.
put my email address in there. So if you are interested in getting it in Sonoma County, we are trying to push it forward. So email me, because the more people that are interested in doing this, the more likely it is to happen, but it's going to be very slow because we already know environmental health does not approve of it. So anyway.
And I would like to also reiterate that, like I said, Mendocino is opening up our zoning code in the near future, and definitely be active with your local governments in the planning and environmental health stuff when regulations are open, because public comment really does drive a lot of decision making.
Okay, it is 11. I think we've got one really short question we'll finish off with, and then the other questions that were in the chat, I'll be happy to try and share those with Karen and Vandy and try and get back to folks. So are cut flowers also considered a commodity product by the state or agricultural? Karen, is that something you could answer for us?
That's an ag product. Yeah.
That's good. That was an easy answer. Penny, am I right in thinking we should move right along?
Yes, thank you very much, Karen and Vandy. That was definitely appreciated. And are you all right for people to contact you with their individual questions, or is there someone else they should contact in Sonoma and Mendocino counties?
For our department, just contact our general planning line. We're working on setting up a planning email as well. But yeah, we typically have people that deal with this kind of stuff at the beginning. So I'll get that information out.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Vandy.
And yeah, yeah, you can email me directly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.